Aloha. My name is Roger Jelinek. I'm Executive Director of the Hawaii Book and Music Festival, and it's my pleasure to welcome attendees and welcome this remarkable panel. Despite the grimness of the topic, there actually seemed to be about the happiest panel we've had. Or at least they are very cheerful about the work that they're doing. And it's very valuable work indeed. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Ira Zunin, who will be the moderator. Aloha.
Thank you, Roger. Again, welcome to the Hawaii Book and Music Festival, the wellness track. Today we'll be speaking for an hour with 5 panelists on autism, autism spectrum disorder, neurodiversity, and to some degree, developmental disabilities in general. You know, autism has a roughly 2% prevalence in Hawaii and is one of the fastest growing neurodevelopmental disabilities in the state. The Lieutenant Governor, Josh Green, when he was a senator, was concerned enough about healthcare access on this issue that he successfully introduced and got a bill passed that says anyone who's got a diagnosis of autism until age 14 has access to $25,000 a year of care by their payer, with a total cost of up to $300,000 by the time they're 14. So that's that reflects a pressing need, and it's very unusual that a single illness gets tagged. We've worked a lot over the years, locally and nationally, to have parity for access to mental health services. Payers tend to pay for the body more readily than mental health, and so there's been a lot of effort to create parity around mental health in general, but autism has really gotten a front seat. I'd like to first introduce Dr. Mei Okihiro, MD. She's a pediatrician and a professor at JABSOM, and focuses on children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorder, other developmental disabilities. We'll then be hearing from Dr. Jeff Stern, a psychologist, professor at Chaminade University, who will also speak about autism, but also this idea of neurodiversity. Then we'll hear from Abby George, from the Department of Health Division of Developmental Disabilities, also known as Miss America. The last 2 panelists, Susan Rocco and Amanda Kaahanui, are parents and involved in a parent-to-parent organization that focuses on parents with children with autism. And as you can see in their backgrounds, there is an opportunity to learn more, do more, and see more on Saturday. Dr. Okihiro?
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you see that? Okay, I'll go ahead and start if you can see my screen.
We don't see the slides, we see the background.
Ah, there we go.
And now we see the whole thing. See, we
okay.
See just the slides themselves.
Use slideshow.
Okay. You can see the slides?
We're seeing everything. The slides, your note page, and the slide deck.
Oh dear.
I think you wanted to use slideshow.
Yep. How's that?
Same thing. I think you need to go.
Hold on. Sorry, everyone. This isn't going quite as we had practiced. How's
Good.
that?
There you
Yes.
go.
Are we good? Okay.
Yep.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being patient. I'm May Okihiro, pediatrician at the Waianae Coast Comprehensive Health Center and a faculty member with the University of Hawaii Department of Pediatrics. So I have the privilege of being present today with these four wonderful colleagues. We each work in different areas to support children with special health care needs. And so we wanted to talk today about autism. Autism is what we in the medical field call a developmental disability or disorder that begins early in childhood. It affects the way people interact with others, communicate, and behave. Many of us know at least one autistic person, maybe your own child, a sibling, a friend, or coworker. Perhaps we know people with autistic features, perhaps even ourselves. For parents, receiving the news about autism is often very hard. Every parent has this perfect image of their perfect child, beautiful, smart, charming, and autism isn't part of that image. So parents often have preconceived notions about autism that are framed by what they see on TV, in movies, on social media. And autistic children are often bullied and about being different. Often parents feel very alone. So today we hope to raise awareness about autism spectrum disorder, the many supports for families in Hawaii, and we want to emphasize the need to shift the paradigm of developmental disabilities like autism so that we can all become more inclusive. So I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Dr. Jeff Stern, who works with me in our LEN program. Jeff?
Thank you, May. Thank you, Ira and Roger as well. Roger made a comment when we first came on thinking that this is kind of a somber or, heavy topic. And I think that speaks to people's beliefs about autism and what it is and how it affects people and what it looks like to have a child with autism. So what I hope to do in my little time here is, besides present some pretty dry data and information, try to give you this understanding that what we know of as autism is evolving. And what we used to think about autism is evolving and changing into a different perspective and understanding, where before we imagined children in special chairs requiring special feeding devices and so forth, and with severe self-injurious behavior has evolved into recognizing that very few of our children with autism actually are at that level of severity. And we used to think that many of our children with autism were intellectually disabled, that they were mentally retarded is the term they used to use back then. Again, changing terms, changing understanding is all part of the evolution of autism. Now we recognize that the majority of children on the spectrum actually have intelligence that's similar to those of the rest of our population. They learn differently and have different needs. So this slide shows how prevalence of autism has evolved. Back in the old days, in the 1980s, when I was in training, they said that autism affected between 5 and 7 in 10,000. And by the early 2000s, it was starting to move like a train, and it's accelerating. I was watching a video yesterday where the director of a surveillance program, it's called AMDD, they're national and they keep a track of autism nationally. He used a parent diagnosis and recognized in 2022 that rate is about 1 in 40 or 2.5% nationally. Interestingly, you might think, well, how about Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders and children who are of minority groups? Are they at higher risk? Do they have higher rates of diagnosis? And the answer is surprisingly no. Caucasian children are typically diagnosed more than children who are ethnic minorities. And the reason for that has nothing to do with the fact that they're more likely to get it. It's that they're usually more able to access the diagnosis and services. So why this increase in prevalence? Why is this train moving? There are a number of explanations that the research is talking about. I'll list a few of them here for you. One is there are changes in how and who is referred. Operation Child Find has been activated at the Department of Education level, and across the state, we're trying to identify children who might be spectrum kids and need special services. There's been a change in availability of diagnoses. There were only a handful of psychology people interested in autism back when I was in grad school. But then the Felix Waihe consent decree hit, and the next thing I know, a lot of young folks in the allied health professionals were receiving training and learning to work with the special population, in part to respond to the increased need that seemed to be arising and what triggered that consent decree. A third reason I think the prevalence is increasing is we're able to identify children earlier. We have better instruments and a more knowledgeable medical and psychological professional groups. Basically, we're more aware and we get better training to identify these kids. And the age of diagnosis is creeping down. It used to be that we often didn't even identify kids in infancy. And that's why the prevalence rate was so low. They were only including children who were infants in the diagnosis before the age of 4 or 5. But most kids don't get diagnosed until they're ages 5 to 7. Heightened public awareness and destigmatization has increased our ability to identify and diagnose children. There's changes in how we diagnose, where we do a much better job of not just relying on simple parent reports or observations, but instead we have good instruments, and the way we define autism has expanded to include all the different types. So back in the day, there were 5 different subtypes. There was, not otherwise specified pervasive developmental disorder for the kids who didn't really fit into Asperger's or straight autism or Rett's. And so now it's a recognition from the research that there's just this umbrella that covers all these children, and that they all have special unique challenges and benefits and strengths that they bring to their experience and to the mental and physical health care world. We used to believe that most kids, as I mentioned, with ASD were intellectually disabled. We know that's less than assumed, and so it's easier to identify those kids who are not intellectually disabled, but are autistic spectrum. And an interesting one that came out maybe about 5 to 10 years ago relates to the age of the father. Turns out there is a correlation between older fathers and the prevalence of autism as well. But my favorite explanation for the rise in autism comes from Dr. Bill Bowman. And I don't know if anybody out there knows who Dr. Bill Bowman was, but he in many ways was the father of child psychiatry at the University of Hawaii Manoa's Medical School. And I call him Uncle Bill because he was one of my mentors. And I remember at a panel once, he said that these really smart, nerdy guys are marrying these really smart, nerdy women and having these unusually smart and nerdy kids, which everybody laughed about. But in some ways, there's a growing belief that it may be tied to evolution, that kids who are on the spectrum and people who are on the spectrum sometimes have really incredibly unique and special talents that could actually drive humanity forward. People like Einstein. So the idea is that when you have these unique changes in evolution and development, maybe you get the good with the bad. You have some really great traits that tie to autism that make them encyclopedic. Some of them have encyclopedic knowledge of topics. And when they get interested in something, they can go deeper than most people can go. But it comes sometimes with some difficulties in terms of social and emotional communication and reciprocity and atypical behaviors. Next slide, May. Thanks. So neurodiversity is at the bottom of the screen. I'm not sure if it's visible to everybody, but around that circle, from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, it has fixations, abnormal flat affected speech, noise sensitivity, social difficulties, anxiety, abnormal posture, poor eye contact, tics and fidgets, aggression, and depression. And what you see is every individual who is anybody, we all lie somewhere on that curve in terms of our diversity. The idea is that every brain is different and every person is different, but individuals who are on the spectrum often show greater amounts of and variability in these areas as they relate to behavior and social and emotional processing, and communication in particular. So the idea of neurodiversity is this idea that we're all very different. We all lie somewhere along that continuum, and that there are people who are are struggling with issues, maybe abnormal posture, and they're very on the high end of abnormality in their posture, and others on the spectrum who are very on the low end of abnormality in their posture. But to describe how far we've come, it's very empowering to recognize that in the old days, we actually used the term FLK, which stood for, pardon me if this offends anyone, funny looking kid. And that was kind of how we identified kids back in the 80s as possibly being a kid on the spectrum. Even though that there was nothing actually physically funny looking about them. They tend to be very facially symmetrical and to be attractive children, many of them. So I always felt that that was a strange thing to say. But now we recognize they're just very diverse. There is nothing appropriate about that kind of language. And so we use language now that is empowering. And I think neurodiversity is an empowering term that captures the variability and the unpredictability of what could be and what is. If I have a child and I already predict how they're going to be, and they're always going to struggle with fidgeting and tics, then I limit their possibilities. But if I just describe them as neurodiverse, I recognize that there are a lot of different ways that they are affected and that they can be helped. Go ahead.
Shall we go hand that over to Abby?
Sure, I think that's probably enough. If folks have additional questions about this stuff, we'll get there. Pass it over to Abigail.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abigail George. I am from the Developmental Disabilities Division, located within the Department of Health. So today, what I'm going to go ahead and talk about is I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the government services that are available to support these individuals with a disability, individuals with autism. And our mission is to make sure that we foster partnerships and provide quality, person-centered, and family-focused services which support and promote self-determination. Our North Star, our vision, if you go ahead and press the next slide, May, is that individuals with an intellectual or developmental disability have healthy, safe, meaningful, and self-determined lives. Next slide, please, May. So just some information about the Developmental Disabilities Division, only because I can't be on this panel without talking about the program that I work for. We are located across the state, across 15 different units on the neighbor island, as well as on Oahu. Next slide, May. And here on Oahu specifically, we are located out of 4 different offices with 8 different case management units supporting all of Honolulu County. Next slide, please. So when we are talking about individuals with a developmental or intellectual disability, the Developmental Disabilities Division has provided services to about 4,000 individuals across the lifespan. So we're not just talking about children with autism, or we're not just talking about autism specifically, but when we are looking, our division provides support from everyone from cradle to grave, from baby to aging. And this just shows the type of support that we have and that government provides supports to these individuals across all ages. Next slide, please, May. So as Jeff was mentioning earlier, we're talking about the supports to supporting people with a disability. Typically, the person located in the blue circle surrounded by their families. And there was a time historically where the government didn't understand what disabilities are, right? Terms like FLK, and it was appropriate to take the individual with a disability away from their family members and inadvertently just wrap them so tightly around with services. We've had previous institutions here in Hawaii, but one thing that all of us are coming coming together, all of us here on the panel today, is we are continuing to move with this evolution to support not only the individual, but if we could go ahead and advance the next slide, May, that these supports and services are not just specifically from the government, but it also provides supports to our families, to our community, as well as to the individual with a disability. So if we're talking specifically about the types of integrated supports that we can provide someone with autism, next slide, May, is that there are specific government programs that are out there that typically support an individual during the various stages. So if we are looking at eligibility specific supports or government services, we have some that with the Department of Health or early intervention, our Department of Education, as well as employment services for with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, and as well as health plan services through MedQuest or Medicaid. But when we are looking to provide supports to the individual, next slide, May, we are providing supports to their families as well. So when we're looking at the different types of support, we have the eligibility specific supports, as well as providing supports to families to help discover and navigate the system, as well as working with other families and connecting with them to build a family of support and a community that supports everyone, children with disability, as well as the families. So this is a perfect segue into our next two panelists, two amazing spin mamas that will talk about the parent supports that are available to children with autism here in Hawaii. Thank you, everyone. Off to you, Susan and Amanda.
Great. Mahalo, Abby. Appreciate that very much. Aloha, everyone. My name is Amanda Kaahanui, and I'm here with Susan Rocco, my colleague here at SPIN, and we are the Special Parent Information Network. Next slide, please. We do a lot of different things here at SPIN. We are not autism specific. We are not disability specific. Our scope of service is birth to 22 years of age. So kids in early intervention all the way up through high school, and even sometimes a little bit beyond that, families will still call us. And really, we're here to help families navigate the system, understand how to find supports and services in their community so that they can have the best outcomes for their kids that they're looking for. So on this slide, you can see that there are several supports to families that SPIN can help families navigate. These are not the be-all, end-all. These are kind of our go-tos, though. LDAH, the Leadership in Disability and Achievement of Hawaii, helps families navigate the IEP or 504 systems in the Department of Education. The Community Children's Council is an Department of Education program, and they help families to figure out what's working, what's not working, and come together to find solutions. Hilo Pa'a helps families understand the health aspects of their children. DD Council helps families and even young adults to find advocacy and help them to navigate like the DD Council and other programs. And then SEAC is a Special Education Advisory Council helping to improve special education in the state. So these are kind of our go-tos when we're looking for advocacy for families. And this is an infographic that we do. We love infographics here at SPIN. There's a couple more here down here on the bottom that you can see, but we also have infographics on inclusion. We have a couple of websites that we will show you later on, and I'll drop those in the chat for you so that you can see them. And we do a newsletter, and we really want to improve how the education system is going. We want to improve how services are provided to families, and we want families to know that community and school inclusion is an option for them and their keiki. Next slide, please. So when families call SPIN and they say, I have a child with autism and I'm looking for some kind of support, then we're going to help them find the active groups here in Hawaii. Now, this may not be, again, the be-all, end-all, but these are kind of our go-to. So Ho'omana is a parent-to-parent support group, and they work statewide. They're doing virtual meetings right now. The Autism Community in Action is a national program, and we have a local chapter here where they do coffee talks and workshops and things for families. The Hawaii Autism Foundation does some really great programs, as well as the Autism Society. Help Your Keiki is not a parent-to-parent support group, but they are a website that you can find really great information to help your child with autism. They really focus on evidence-based programs and evidence-based services. So you know that if you find something on the Help Your Keiki website, you know it's not a fly-by-night solution. It's not, you know, something weird. It's not snake oil. These really are things that are important to families and things that work. And then we also want to encourage you to come to spinconference.org and find resources, more resources that we have there for you. All right, Susan.
Aloha, everyone. Thank you for having us today. I'm the old timer here in the group, which is obvious. And I just wanted to spend a minute talking about our name, the Special Parent Information Network. At the time that we put it together, we thought we were being very clever. And there were things like Exceptional Parent Magazine. The reality today is that we parents want to be just like other families. We don't want to be singled out. We don't want to be special. And information is key. I know Dr. Stern was talking about old practices with the medical system. There used to be a belief that we shouldn't tell families too much about their child because they're not ready to hear it. Well, luckily, back when the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it started to include young infants and toddlers in their coverage for IDEA services. There were some real basic messages that went out to all professionals, and they include that families need to hear the information that you have. Don't sugarcoat it, give it to us. If we can't handle it, we'll put it to the side and we'll look at it later. But the reason why SPIN is here basically is to give families access to information. And we have partners in the field that do other things like training. Amanda was just going through a list of other partner agencies. But SPIN tries to be the one source where we can point you towards valued information that you as a family can pick up and use, or you can store it for a later consideration. And one of the things we've started to do because of the pandemic is to archive workshops that have been done in the past. We're going to talk in a minute about our annual conference. I have personally lived through 35 of them, and they're all fabulous, I have to say. It was much more fun when we were in person, but the value of the last 2 years of having virtual conferences is that we now have a library of wonderful presentations by some very Akamai folks. And when I say Akamai, I'm including parents, because the model that we use for our conference is to have parents and professionals co-presenting together. And that way you get the bigger picture. You get what science says about something, what education says about something, and then you get the family's perspective on how they have worked through whatever the issue is. So you'll see on the screen that we do have some archived workshops specifically about autism. That first piece there with Anne Garfinkel and the Manfredi family is a fabulous one, because it talks about motivation and how so often professionals miss the key to finding out what really motivates a child with autism, and that until you can do that, you really can't get very far with their education and their progress. We also have archived presentation of Josh Fouts, who's at Kaiser. He is a BCBA himself, a board certified behavioral analyst. And he's using a term that we love called positive behavioral supports. It means that you are shaping a child's behavior, but you're doing it using cues that they give you, and you're using it to improve their quality of life, not to make them behave, not to manage them, but basically to help give them a better set of skills that will carry them forward. And we also love one of our presenters, whose name is Benjamin Chu, who happens to be a doctoral student at UH. And he is a man with autism that has talked to us about how mindful meditation makes a big difference in his life. So SPIN is about sharing the perspectives of lots of different people and having families take from it what really is important to them, and also helping professionals. It's important for them to see the parent's perspective. Next slide, please, May. So we're getting down to the nitty gritty, which is a conference coming up in just 2 days. This Saturday, October 22nd, we're offering another mini conference that is going to be on Zoom. It's very easy to access. And you'll notice that we have a lot of running across the screen here with Amanda's and my background. And that's because we've chosen a theme that's called It's a Marathon, Not a Sprint. And that refers to skills that families need across their children's lifespan. You don't just have something come up once and then it's pow. You find certain things are going to recur over and over again. And if you can get skillful in dealing with that particular thing, you're going to have a much happier parenting life, and you're going to be able to do more for your child. So we're really fortunate to have Dr. Matthew Wappett from Utah talk to us about stress and how to manage stress. And then we're going to get right into the specifics of mindful meditation, and we're going to give people a taste of it. And finally, we're going to do something called care mapping, which originated, I think, in a neonatal ICU setting. It was a way of helping families figure out what services their child already has and what services they might need in the future. It lays it out in a map that makes it a lot easier for the families to absorb, and also give them a sense of how much of a load they're carrying, but it's helpful to get organized. So we hope that anybody listening or who knows of families who have kids with disabilities will point them towards our website, and Amanda is going to put that link in the chat. It's spinconference.org, and join us for the conference because it's going to be a good one. Thank you. And next slide, May. So this is just our contact information, and thank you so much for including us.
Thank you, Susan. You know, Roger is going to place this on the panel description on the Hawaii Book and Music Festival website. So for anybody who wasn't able to note that down, if you, tomorrow go back to the HBMF website, you'll be able to find that. Great presentation. We've got like 27 minutes for discussion. And I wanted to go back to the clinical side. And, Dr. Stern had mentioned that, we're seeing this increased prevalence, increased numbers of people with autism, and described reasons related to access, identification, public awareness, and then a genetic reason presented by psychiatrist Dr. Bauman, who's kind of smart, nerdy people having children, marrying, having children. But I wanted to ask you, Dr. Okihiro, about environmental factors. There was a time, I guess there's still some people that think that, well, autism is from vaccinations, so I don't want to vaccinate my kids. Screen time, diet, air pollution, preservatives. What are your thoughts on increased prevalence relevant to environment?
So we know that autism has been around. It existed hundreds of years ago, and it's not related to vaccinations. So the original studies that have gotten all the news were from England by a researcher who has, his study has been completely found to be some of the data has been made up and the analysis wrong. So so his results have been completely dispelled. Children in the first 2 years of life get a lot of vaccinations. That's our opportunity to provide them with the vaccinations in series to protect them. And it is also at the same age when kids first develop the signs of autism. And so that coincidence is that it's a coincidence, and it has to do with the age at which these two things are happening. But the association with vaccinations has definitely been dispelled. So autism doesn't develop by what a child eats or what he's exposed to in the air. It is probably due to many different factors, and some of which we still don't know in terms of hereditary patterns, that sort of thing. Jeff, do you want to add to anything to that?
Let me just ask one more kind of
Okay,
medical question related to environment. If somebody is going to have autism, is that already determined sort of in conception, in utero, or can somebody maybe have a predisposition but then actually end up with a phenotypic expression of actually having autism because of postpartum factors, any postpartum factors?
I don't know if there's really any studies to show that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
I want to just add, if you don't mind, there over the years have been a lot of speculative kinds of questions about certain kinds of strategies that address specific issues that arise for some people with autism. Some kids with autism, for example, are very sensitive to things on their skin. And they can't have tags on their shirts, and they have to have certain clothes. Otherwise, they're very irritated, and they get sometimes really difficult to handle. And so some people believe that if you brush them and do certain things to help them, it's like a sensory integration thing. They're integrating sensory information. And there's been mixed research on a lot of these. These are things that are often examined, and people will publish studies that kind of suggest, yes, this is something, but then follow-up studies don't necessarily support the original research. And so what we're left with is a lot of inconclusive research on these environmental toxins, so to speak, or other possible effects. The one true exception to that, though, is vaccination, which has been studied by more than just this individual study. There's been, I'd say, dozens to 100 studies on this. But one last point, which was there was a very impactful study that was done maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where they looked at the brains of developing fetuses and looked at like genetic predictors. And they did determine, I'm sorry, I don't remember the specifics of the study, but they determined that autism is formed in the brain. It happens as the brain is forming, which is why it's a neurodevelopmental disorder. And it's kind of just not typical, so to speak. It's not neurodevelopmentally typical. And so that's kind of where this non-neurotypical thing comes from. It's neurodiversity evolves from this idea of kind of a diversity in their brain. It's not just one gene. It's hundreds of genes. It's like, imagine the biggest switchboard you can imagine, and some of them are on and some of them are off. And any one of a combination can result in, like you said, a phenotype presentation. But nevertheless, there's still hundreds of switches in play.
Yeah. So, sorry.
I just want to emphasize that autism is not the result of bad parenting, things that somebody ate during pregnancy or did during pregnancy. It's not a parent's fault. So I just want to emphasize that.
I guess the other thing that Dr. Stern is saying, we had a panel just a couple of days ago about gene splicing, for certain diseases. And kind of Dr. Stern's point is, well, you can't splice it in or splice it out. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of things going on genetically. And I guess there's still more for us to learn from the standpoint of science around neurodevelopment in utero. You use the term neurodiversity a number of times, and I just want to confirm that that's kind of the same as autism spectrum disorder, or maybe even neurodiversity is broader than that. But can you talk a little bit about this idea of spectrum? I mean, you hear people, you mentioned kind of old terminology of FLK for funny looking kid, which is not politically correct, but you hear people still say, oh, that guy's kind of spectrum-y. And who knows, maybe they're preoccupied, maybe it's a function of neurodiversity. But can you talk about the idea of the spectrum, autism spectrum disorder? Dr. Stern.
Sure. So they're kind of parallel terms. The neurodiversity refers to the fact that it's so diverse, it's like it's spectrum. I think the spectrum nature of it is, I guess, best explained by the kinds of kids that I've seen over the years. When I started cutting my teeth back in the 90s, there was a school called Pohukaina Elementary. It was on the slopes of Diamond Head, and it had some of the most involved and difficult kinds of kids who needed sometimes one-on-two support, as opposed to one-to-one or even no support. And these kids were self-injurious, and many of them had what they call stereotypies, which are kind of behavioral, repetitive behavioral exhibitions. It's like kind of tick-like, but instead they're very self-stimulatory. So for example, I had one that was at Pohukaina who had to wear a helmet because it really tickled his brain to smack his head against a wall, which was extremely distressing to families. Another child who would gouge at his eyes with his finger because it felt really good. And we assumed it was because he had a visual impairment. But it later was seen that it was tied to his autism spectrum, and that there was some sort of positive aspect to it. It stimulated him. So that's one end of the spectrum, at the very bottom of that bell curve of the lowest functioning, but still autism is at the core. And there are still things we can do for them, just like the things we can do with the kids on the other end of the spectrum to address their needs. And their needs are very unique, which is also why it's called a spectrum, because the kinds of things that they need that will help them varies from kid to kid.
I wanted to pick up this topic of mindfulness meditation. It actually came out of Vipassana. My friend John Kabat-Zinn was the one that started doing research. So if nowadays, pretty much any kind of medical research that includes a type of meditation will use mindfulness. There's no religion in it, and it's simple, it's straightforward, and it can also be the most difficult thing in the world. I've done long retreats in Burma and Thailand doing that. I wanted to ask, and that will be included in the SPIN conference, as I understand, right? So I wanted to ask this question to all of you: is, Dr. Stern, you had one slide that you covered of sort of this. It was like a big circle with pie pieces that had kind of different elements of expression of autism, ranging from depression to communication and so on. Like what kind, what are the attributes of somebody, who with autism or on the spectrum would be the best candidates for mindfulness meditation? Do you have any inkling about that?
That's a good question. I don't think we know what works best for whom yet with this, because there's so much diversity, and what works for one child doesn't always work for another child, even though they're very similar in their presentation of symptoms. That being said, though, I think this is really best suited for a child that's got comorbidity, which means that they're not only on the spectrum, but they have like anxiety, or they have other kinds of issues. Inattentiveness or ADHD is a common element in kids who are on the spectrum. A lot of them have trouble with focusing and concentrating and sustaining their attention. And so it's very helpful sometimes to use these strategies to help them with that challenge. And I have done work with some of my clients who are anxious and struggle with that using this strategy. I must admit, though, it has mixed benefit. Some of the kids that I've done it with really respond to it and take it up like a gauntlet. And others, it just is not a good fit. They're not interested, and they'd much rather just read or do the things that they want to do. So
you just have to give it a shot and see if it sticks, kind of thing.
Right, which is why it's kind of what works for whom, under what conditions, at what time, kind of a model, as opposed to let's try this because it works with a lot of people. I'm sorry,
Right.
Susan, you were going to make a comment?
Well, I really appreciate an opportunity to give the perspective of a parent who has a kid who many people would say is low on the spectrum. And that's a personal challenge that I have to all of you, is to avoid the term low functioning, because what I have noticed living with my 41-year-old and him teaching me all these years, he naturally is a person that lives in the moment. He's my motivation for learning mindful meditation because he's mellow, and I'm so fortunate that he is. But my point is that he has gifts. He has a way of connecting with nature that I don't have. So I think parents generally in the beginning are very devastated over what their children can't do. And over time, they recognize their unique gifts, which is something that all living creatures have, and that we need to celebrate and to promote, because they're helping society, just as your scientists, your kids with autism that are being hired by the tech companies. So it's
awesome. Yeah. I mean, it's people have even said that it's not normal. It's not, we didn't evolve to be able to read. That's kind of an odd thing for us to just have language that we read and write, and obviously there's enough, from the Darwinian standpoint, that there's enough about being autistic that made us survive over the long years. Can we talk a little bit more, just kind of paint some pictures of the gifts, the strengths in life, and for individuals and for society that some autistic individuals have?
But you're probably, Dr. Stern probably recognizes the name Wolf Wolfensberger. Does that ring a bell? He was somebody who was really influential back in the early days of my son's childhood. So this goes back a way. He was from Syracuse, and they were some of the early advocates for getting folks out of institutions, for providing inclusive education, just really showing the way and valuing people who had the most challenging behaviors or who were having the most struggle in connecting to other people. And he wrote a paper that I picked up when my son was very young about these characteristics of kids that he was working with that made them really special. And one was that they were not materialistic, that they showed true appreciation for their fellow man. And it didn't matter if that person was smart or had money or any of that. And there's just a whole list of things that we as families pick up over time. My son has a great sweetness about him and an innocence, and that's not true for every child, but we will see those gifts if we can learn to get past all the negative diagnoses they've had. I used to have a whole list of negative things that folks, or diagnostic labels, and now I just introduce Jason as incredibly handsome and charmingly eccentric, because that's what he is. Yeah.
Cool. What else? I mean, Amanda, what have you seen in terms of gifts, kind of special qualities in autistic children?
Well, they're just, like Susan said, they're just so unique, right? it's that spectrum. We're not seeing like all of them are this or all of them are that. We do see generalistics. You know, many students or kids with autism are very detail oriented, and they can go deep into a topic and learn everything about it. You know, we know little kids like dinosaurs, but maybe a kid with autism will learn all the dinosaurs and all of the books and all of the movies and all of the, I mean, they can really get down into the nitty gritty of things. And that's a skill that a lot of people are looking for, but can seem like it's a challenge or abnormal because not all the kids are doing it, right? So we want to put kids in boxes. We want kids to be average or normal or, you know, be like the other kids, but really it's a celebration of differentness and uniqueness that we can see in each child. And I also want families to remember that it's hard maybe when the kids are really young, right? When they may not have some language or they're not communicating like they would be expected to, or they don't want to be touched, or sounds are really loud. And many kids kind of grow up and through it if they have good therapies and they've got good support with the families to kind of move them through. So Benjamin, who's one of our speakers this weekend, has talked to our SPIN audience before about being a nonverbal kid who lashed out at his mom. And now here he is, a doctoral student. He's able to make a presentation. We know another young lady who only spoke in Disney lyrics and Disney movies. That's how she communicated when she was younger. And now she's an international spokesperson for Special Olympics, and she travels around and she does presentations, and she's a wonderful speaker. But if you'd have met her when she was 5, she might have been rocking in the corner and singing Disney lyrics. And if you tried to connect to her, she would just say something from a Disney movie. So remember that your kid is unique. Find those things that they like. Don't dangle. Like if they love Disney, don't dangle. If you do what I want you to do, I'm going to give you this Disney movie to watch. Use those things that they're interested in as motivators, as ways to draw them out, to learn a language, to learn math and English, and just follow your child's journey and appreciate every moment and every unique ability that they have.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I did.
All right, go ahead.
No, Dr. Stern, go ahead.
I had one example that I think is really it brings those two comments together. I had a client that was really into particular films from Disney and liked to watch these Disney films. Well, one of the things he wasn't really good at was going to the bathroom. So what we did was we, of course, had the Disney characters that were his favorites all sitting around and hanging out with a puppet show to follow, where we actually would take lines from the film, or we'd have a video camera in the bathroom, and we would actually have the characters, moving around while the thing, he was just watching it and he was so excited. And then it would happen. He'd go to the bathroom and everybody would cheer. And that's how we got that kid toilet trained, using his interest and his strengths to kind of get him past a challenge that was in his way. And he's now in his 20s. So, they change too. It's not like the spectrum it really is a moving target. So I talk about neurodiversity and we talk about wellness, or like positive psychology kinds of models for autism. It's because that's where we're heading. That's where this train's going. It's unstoppable. It's moving towards a recognition of neurodiversity, a recognition of it being a spectrum condition, and a recognition of the strengths that people on the spectrum bring to society.
One of the things that really comes across in this panel is just how much true joy, heartful joy that each of you have found in working with these people, whether they're your children or children of parents, or doing so as clinicians. So we've talked about autism this hour, and we've highlighted the fact that we're seeing a higher prevalence, largely because of more access and more awareness and better diagnostics. We've talked about the fact that it's not based on what you eat or the vaccination causing autism theory has been clearly disproven. And we've talked about this idea of the spectrum, neurodiversity, that there's just, it's that patients and people with autism are incredibly diverse, incredibly unique, each totally unique, with some great strengths, some great gifts of heart, of joy, of memory, of focus, of attention to nature. And then we also spoke this hour about the fact that in 2015, a law was passed that enables anyone with autism that has any insurance to get up to $25,000 of care per year and $300,000 up until a total of $300,000 up until the age of 14. We've got like 3 minutes left, and I just wanted to see if Amanda and Susan, you could share one more time about this this opportunity coming up on Saturday for parents and families, children with autism. You're both on mute. Susan, you're on mute.
She just said, "You go, Amanda."
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zunin. Yeah, the SPIN conference, we're really excited. This is our 36th annual conference that we do. Of course, we've been in person pre-COVID, and we have pivoted to virtual conferences, and we created a whole new website just to stash those workshops that were recorded and the resources that folks normally would find in our fair. So we are also doing a virtual event now on Saturday, October 22nd. We're looking forward to crossing our fingers to an in-person event in April 22nd, 2023. But it's just really a place for families to come and get information, and the people who work with them, teachers, therapists, doctors, just anybody that's connected to students and people with disabilities. We want them to come and learn and network as best we can on our little Zoom screens, and take home that message that your kid is special and that you as a parent are growing. And even if you feel like it's overwhelming right now, it's going to get better, and that there are supports, that there are people out here that can help you move your kid along the way, and we learn as we grow, just like our kids do.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Susan from SPIN. Thank you, Dr. Okihiro, who invited the other panelists, Dr. Stern, psychologist, professor at Chaminade. Dr. Okihiro is a professor at JABSOM and a pediatrician. If you're interested in the SPIN conference or anything about SPIN where you have actual services, and she's no longer with us, but we also heard from someone who works for the Division of Developmental Disabilities at the Department of Health. So there's other resources there. But to learn more about SPIN, you can go to the Hawaii Book and Music Festival website and look at this presentation, and the website and more information will be there either today or tomorrow. You can also learn more about our speakers, what they do, where they work, and how to access them or their organizations that they've created or work with. I'll turn it over to Roger, the Executive Director.
That was a wonderful panel. And I agree with Ira that you all have such high morale. It's just such a difficult challenge. It's just quite marvelous to hear you. One correction: the recording of this will not yet be up on our website. It'll be up on the Better Tomorrow Speaker Series YouTube channel, and then a likely edited version of that will eventually be up on our website. In both cases, they're up pretty much indefinitely, certainly at least a year. So if you want to draw attention to this panel's work today, that's a good place to direct people. Again, thank you very much. I really learned a great deal. And
Thank you. Thank you.
a lot of prejudices. And
Take care. Bye-bye.
was most impressed.